Hi, welcome. I'm Susan Noyes, the founder of Make It Better Media Group, and which includes Make It Better TV, Better Magazine, and the Make It Better Foundation. We host this event, Women on the Rise, in tandem with our annual Most Powerful Women list to advise and inspire others just like you who are leaning into their careers too. We're delighted that this year's panel includes two of our 2023 Most Powerful Women, Cecilia Conrad and Jennifer Staines, and that Morgan Stanley is once again our presenting sponsor and represented today by Barron's Hall of Famer Kathy Roser. Please see our entire 2023 Most Powerful Women list through this link. And please send your questions or comments for the panelists at any time through the chat feature. We will try to address all of them. Please know that our MIB TV and YouTube channel will host this video, and it also will be included in follow-up Better Magazine articles that summarize the top-line advice presented today. And the articles will be featured in future Better Letters, which are our email newsletter received by over 85,000 subscribers. Each panelist will share their career story and advice before we hold the panel discussion that will include the questions that you submit. And therefore, I'm now very happy to introduce Kathy Roser, founder of the Roser Barbanti Group, managing director of Morgan Stanley, and investment advisor extraordinaire. For over 30 years, Kathy has successfully helped top executives and multi-generational families, acting on her belief that educated investors are better investors. Importantly, Kathy became an early adopter of ESG, or social impact strategies too. Kathy, welcome, and thanks for all you're about to tell us.
Great. I'm so happy to be here with all of you to share the next hour. I'm going to make a few comments about really the wealth of women in America today. And in my 30 years being in the financial services industry, I've really had this front row seat for the evolution of women as increasingly effective and influential investors. I truly have seen women on the rise. And today, women are managing more wealth than ever before, investing confidently across complex asset classes, and influencing major policy decisions and financial markets as shareholders and board members and investors. Really, the progress is stunning when we consider how much female investors and leaders have had to overcome. Wealth management and finance have historically been male-dominated professions, and just a few decades ago, women investors were regularly overlooked by financial advisors and researchers. In fact, many financial professionals viewed women investors as less financially confident, less sophisticated, and more risk adverse. As a result, many women became underinvested or underplanned, with negative financial consequences that really compounded over time. I've recognized this and have made it the cornerstone of our practice at Morgan Stanley to better educate and empower female investors. It's really exciting to see where we are today. Women control a third of total U.S. household financial assets, more than $10 trillion. And by 2030, women in the U.S. are projected to control much of the $30 trillion in financial assets. And that's really exciting. And women are really going to be the largest beneficiaries of the current transfer of wealth, either by longevity, and women live on average 5 years longer than men, and through inheritance, and many other reasons, but those are the primary ones. So I have 4 pieces of advice. Number 1, for women on the rise, I think it's really important and critical to be involved in your finances. Don't give up control. At least take a seat at the table and be true to trusting yourself. 2 is take the time to understand risk and return trade-offs. Women inherently have been erring on the side of being more conservative. And I'd rather people think about it as the risk level, the return they're looking to achieve, and their time horizon. And plan for the future. And so, Keith, if you could bring that slide up for me. There's a lot on here, but the point I want to make is because women live longer, they need to save and set goals to ensure your financial security. And this is one simple way that we take a pretty complex approach and try to put into categories of your family wealth management life plan. And all these areas will become important to you at different phases of your life. Some will be really important, some not so important, but it's important that you have a plan put in place. And we motivate our clients to really engage early, outlining goals and suggesting a goals-based investing approach. So one of the things I picked out of here is, I think one of the most important things women on the rise need to think about is having your own credit in your own name. It's most important. Of all those things in here, it's really important that you think that you have credit in your own name. It helps launch you as you're rising throughout the years. And the other thing on here that I'd like to point out is that we found that many of our clients, and women in particular, tend to invest with a specific goal in mind. And I've seen really successful women put a really good wealth management plan together, have money to invest, and then base their way they invest their money around their values and the impact that they want to make in their community and in the country, of the world. And so I'll leave you with that and turn that back to you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Kathy. You gave some great advice, and I've already gotten some questions that we will follow up on. Next, I'm delighted to introduce Jennifer Staines. She is the president and CEO of Financial Investments Corporation, where she oversees private equity investments and the Staines family office operations. Prior to finding FIC, she enjoyed a highly successful career as a Deloitte consultant. Jennifer's Chicago and Illinois-focused civic leadership includes serving as chair of Navy Pier, past chair of Ravinia, and as trustee of many other leading organizations. In short, Jennifer Staines is highly valued for her ability to create impact wherever she uses her strategic lens. Welcome, Jennifer.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be here and appreciate getting the hour with all of you and also being nominated. So thank you for that, Susan, for the Make It Better list this year. And I guess Susan asked if I would talk a little bit about my career as outlining some of the advice I would have. And I guess I would say I'm unlike, I could not agree more with what Kathy was saying on the Woman on the Rise. I was born in a little bit more of a privileged situation. My father was a very successful entrepreneur, which actually was a kind of a hamper to me, but then also the biggest way I could actually move forward as successfully as I did. And I say that I'm one of three. He had three daughters. I have an identical twin and a sister a year younger. And I always say my dad was untested virtue. If he had a son, I might not be where I am today, but he didn't. And so what happened in my career was I went to Davidson and majored in math. And I realized quickly I did not want to go on in math. And back then they didn't have data analytics as a profession. And I did what a lot of women did, and what was really encouraged of me by my math teachers, because I had some that really didn't think women should be math majors at all. And I ended up going on and becoming a high school math teacher for 2 years right out of Davidson. Turns out that was the hardest job I ever had, but taught me a ton. And I'm naturally very impatient, so it was not a fit for me. And I ended up going back to business school. But if you think about teaching, you're in front of a classroom all day, every day. You have to be quick on your feet. And you have to actually learn to not have fear in front of an audience. And I will tell you, high school students are by far the hardest audience I've ever had anytime in my career. So to get through those 2 years was challenging. And then I went to Kellogg, and I started Kellogg way back in 1987. And that was the year my dad sold his company. So from the moment I went to Kellogg, he was after me to start a family office with him in which we would make private equity investments. Never having done that, I was terrified. And working for my dad, everybody told me I was like crazy to think about doing that. And I realized he was not somebody I was going to learn from right away. So I decided I needed to get some experience before starting the family office. And so coming out of Kellogg, I ended up doing management consulting for 4 years. Back then, by the way, there was no private equity track at business schools. It was everybody either did consulting, investment banking, or if you were at Kellogg, they would go into marketing as well. But I did management consulting for a few years. And then realizing we were going to be making investments, I thought I should have some hands-on experience in an operating company. And so a friend of mine, who was also a cousin, was interested in buying a company, and I helped him buy a little printing company and worked with him for 1.5 years as a CFO, COO. And that was actually the first place I went after finding a mentor for myself, because I realized as a COO, literally I had 24 all white men working on printing presses that reported up to me. I had no idea how to manage this kind of worker. And so one of my closest friends from Kellogg, who was a human capital consultant, who had taught me all about Myers-Briggs. And a lot of people know it today, but back then it was just really starting to get used more in a workplace. And it was one of my early lessons that management really isn't about yourself and having your style. To be a really good manager or leader, it's figuring out how to work with the people who you're working with. And the blue collar mindset was very different than the professional mindset that I was dealing with at Deloitte. And so I needed to deal with them very differently, and finding that coach to help me, and he really kind of mentored me all the way through, was just incredibly helpful to me. And after doing that for about 1.5 years, I got up the chutzpah to start the family office with my father. And in our case, we went after only private equity investments. Our objective is to hit a 25% annual rate of return, which means you have to double your money in 3 years and triple it in 5 years. So it's very aggressive investing. So I was taking big risk on every investment we made, which was terrifying given I'd never done this before. And so the way I learned, one, I started small. I only did tiny investments in the beginning. And two, the way I really learned the business wasn't from my father. I talked him into, instead of doing direct investments ourselves, let's start by going into some other funds. We would be the lead investor. And with the permission of the folks we backed, I would steal their model. And because I was a math major, I could actually study the model. And that's how I learned to do the financial modeling, was kind of on my own. And very quickly, I realized I was always in rooms with all men, because back then in the mid-90s, there was very few women in private equity. And over time, I realized I could actually play to my own strengths. And because I would sit back and I would listen a lot, and I would figure out what was important to the guys that we were trying to do investing with, and realized, oh, I could actually structure a deal a little bit differently than they were thinking, and it would be helpful to them and their family if I didn't pay them all cash up front, but over 3 years' time instead, and pay them an interest. And I realized you name the price and I can name the structure, and I can get a much better deal done than a lot of the typical gentlemen would in private equity, because they always wanted to show how smart they were by sort of getting every single point. Like, they wanted to view themselves, I think, as the winner on every single point. And I quickly realized it wasn't about being the winner. It was about actually having all of you win. And slowly kind of got a lot more confidence being myself. And then over time, and our track record, by the way, is the 25 IRR. We've hit more than that on our direct deals. So over time, I felt like I earned the right to not just make good investments, but to make investments that actually mattered to me and mattered to my family. And so I went from just getting returns, and Kathy put this really well, is to try to have impact with the investments we were making. And I'm a huge believer that every single investment we make actually has an impact, whether it's job creation, whether it's wealth creation for the entrepreneurs we're backing. I, for one, right now, am very focused on trying to reduce the wealth gap. So we're very focused on backing more women and entrepreneurs of color. And we're able to do that very successfully by being very focused and proactive in terms of the kinds of people we're trying to back. And so I think I've kind of shared a few of my key lessons, but I guess one big one before I turn it back over and we can get into some questions later would be to lean into conflict. I think the more I have learned to handle conflict up front, don't shy away from it. I think all of us, if we're arising, we're natural conflict avoiders, but to actually lean into it, to learn how to face it head on, you never really enjoy it, but to learn how to come out the other side better, stronger, whether it's the person that you're having a challenge with or the company that you're dealing with is having a hard time. That's what really gives you the leadership skills going forward is leaning into conflict as successfully as you can. And the other last piece of advice I'll give is it really, at the end of the day, is all about who you choose to do life with. So you want to pick your partners carefully. You want to pick the people you're investing in carefully. And you never know about somebody until you live with them, until you see how they handle success and failure. But choose your partners carefully, because that's, at the end of the day, what matters most.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. You gave us a lot. And I have some questions that will follow up, but I want to give everyone a heads up, Kathy and Cecilia, that I would love to have everyone else speak a bit about investing in order to reduce the wealth gap. I'm fairly confident that MacArthur Foundation does that and that Morgan Stanley does too. So that will be a good topic to really follow up on. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Cecilia. She is the CEO of Lever for Change, board member ex officio, and senior advisor of the MacArthur Foundation. She originally joined MacArthur to oversee their MacArthur Fellows Program, which most of you know as the Genius Grants Program. While doing that work, Cecilia also led a cross-foundation initiative which launched 100 and Change, which is an open call contest that awards $100 million to organizations poised to solve critical problems of the time. Cecilia continues to manage this contest while now also running the $10 million or more matching grant initiatives known as Lever for Change. Cecilia was recruited to MacArthur from Pomona College, where she enjoyed a very successful career as an academic and as an administrative leader. And full disclosure, I was honored to work closely with Cecilia as a Poetry Foundation trustee, where I observed her extraordinary leadership during the most trying pandemic times, while she continued to commute to Texas to care for her ailing mother too. Cecilia also serves as trustee at many other institutions around the world. In fact, she just arrived back from Milan. Welcome, Cecilia.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for including me in this list of most powerful women. And as Susan said, I came to philanthropy really just 10 years ago after a career as an economics professor and then as an academic administrator. I was vice president of academic affairs at Pomona and at Scripps College. So I'm going to share 3 lessons that I have learned in my career to date, but of course, I'm still learning. So I reserve the right to, if you ask me 2 years from now, revise this list. The first thing is I'm going to borrow language from a MacArthur fellow, Lin-Manuel Miranda and Hamilton. And that is that if you get to be in the room where it happens, you need to make something happen. We can spend a lot of energy fighting to get into positions where we can make a difference. But then once we are in those positions, it is easy to relax and forget why you wanted to be there. If your primary goal becomes the maintenance of your position in power, then it's probably time to move on. Make sure you use your privilege and your talents to make the place where you are better and the world better. 2, don't waste your emotional bandwidth on unproductive emotions like hate or envy. I grew up in the segregated South and through much of my life had to deal with racist and sexist comments, policies that excluded or ignored my needs, or situations where I had to jump through more hoops than others to reap the same rewards. But I learned a lesson from my father. When he was the first Black on the Dallas school board, I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and encountered hate. He didn't expend his emotional energy on the people who were expressing that hate. He recognized that hate takes up valuable bandwidth that could be directed at creating a free breakfast program, ending a mandate that pregnant teens drop out of high school, creating a bilingual education program, desegregating sports and extracurricular activities like speech and debate. So, what he taught me was that when I encounter situations of hate and so on, what I have to do is to sometimes go someplace and scream for a moment, but to limit that and recognize that I really want to devote my energies on making the world better and having impact. And three, my third piece of advice, you're going to realize your greatest potential by elevating and amplifying others. If there is a through line in my career, it is this focus. First, as a college professor for my students, then as a dean for younger faculty. It's really what kind of gives me joy and jazzes me up. And that's certainly true in the work that I do now. And what I've seen is that the best teachers, the best managers, the best leaders recognize that your success is defined by the success of those you teach, those you manage, those you lead. And the best employees make their bosses look good. At the MacArthur Fellows Program, we identify exceptionally creative individuals and give them the visibility and financial freedom that allows them to take more risk and be more creative in the future. At Lever for Change, we identify, amplify, and elevate bold problem solvers and connect them to equally bold funders. In the 4 years that we've been around, we have unlocked $1.5 billion in philanthropic grants for social change. In both programs, we're seeking creative thinkers who might otherwise remain undiscovered because of discrimination, poverty, and other systemic inequality. But because of this work, I'm sort of elevating and pushing forward the more creative people out there, much more creative than me. I can now take a little bit of teeny credit for an Emmy, a Grammy, it's one of those EGOTs, a Nobel Prize even, for functional zero homelessness in 10 U.S. communities, for improved diagnosis of mental illness in 12 Texas healthcare systems, for the first global coalition of refugee-led organizations to advocate on their behalf, and for Body the Goat, this is Body the Goat, a Muppet who has been developed for a new Arabic language sesame workshop program called Ahilan Simpson, Welcome Sesame. So there's this way in which all of those things I can take a teeny bit of credit for because of this work amplifying others. So just to recap, 3 pieces of advice: use your privilege in order to make things happen, and your luck, because sometimes it's about luck. Don't waste your emotional bandwidth, and realize your greatest potential by elevating others. And I look forward to having conversations about the wealth gap and any other questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. That was perfect. And, that's the goal of Make It Better. We like to identify and elevate the most inspiring voices and individuals, which is why the 3 of you are on this panel right now. So, my goodness, I'd be happy to talk about all the IGOT winners. I think you piqued a lot of curiosity with that. But I really, since we are trying to give great advice to women who are leaning into their careers, could we actually go back to that question about how would a woman apply, or how should they present themselves, or a woman-owned business, or someone who's like determined to help in that wealth gap space? What are the programs that you are familiar with? What advice do you have for them? And does your firm, like Morgan Stanley, have any particular lens for doing that work too? Kathy, do you want to go first?
Which starts?
Kathy, you're on mute.
Can you unmute me?
Now you're unmuted.
Okay, good. So my perspective on changing the wealth or helping with the wealth gap really comes through education. And people do not need to retire broke. It can come down to as simple as saving $100 a month from age 25 to age 65 is $1.1 million. Or funding a Roth IRA that allows people to put money in a retirement plan, $6,000 a year adds up to $2.5 million over a 40-year time period. So I really think when people understand the power of saving a little bit of money, a lot of it comes down to having goals and objectives about balancing today's goals with future goals. And so we spend a lot of time when we're talking to employees, we're talking about people about those opportunities that it comes down to really saving some money.
Thank you so much. Cecilia.
Yes, I just wanted to jump in and to second the education part, but also to note that there are programs out there. I think one of the barriers that particularly young women face these days in trying to begin the process of saving and open these accounts is the debt that they're carrying sometimes from their education, the student debt load. But there are a lot of programs out there that are trying to help manage student debt, to consolidate student debt. And I'll give an example from one of the challenges we've run, the Equality Can't Wait challenge that we ran at Lever for Change. There's one of the finalists was a group called the Last Mile Education Fund. And this is an effort to help women who are interested in STEM fields and who are at risk of leaving school because of the additional cost of that. So finding programs like that where the people are given funding to help them support the cost of living and other things that might prevent them from fulfilling their degrees is another opportunity to set yourself up in the right place once you have finished your education to begin right away thinking long term about how you can save and invest for the future.
So there's a question in the chat about, we want women not to be risk adverse. How do you recommend people act? Like what are the tricks, the tools, the education to get a little more comfortable with?
I'll tell you one thing. I'll jump in on this, and I'm in the risk business. So my father did a very interesting thing when I turned 13. So I was pretty young, and he knew he was going to be a successful entrepreneur at that point. He hadn't sold his company yet, but he was doing gifting every year that you legally can do to me and my two sisters. And from the time he was 13, he made me start investing $10,000 a year, but I had to do it in a single stock. He would not let me do it in multiple things because you had to learn you make your money on concentrated bets. So sort of the opposite, Kathy, of some of the things you're going to learn on the whole asset allocation model. It was having enough courage of your conviction and doing your homework to make a single investment. And so sort of back to the wealth gap question, I obviously come at it more from an entrepreneurship perspective and how can we support more women entrepreneurs? And there's so many women entrepreneurs. And right now in particular, often that are coming out of it having had kids, feel like they couldn't work full time. They have great ideas on what they want to do. And so kind of as a firm, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of things going on in Chicago, whether it's the Cast Us Fund or under P33, if you've heard about the P33 initiative, they're trying to help more women and entrepreneurs of color throughout Chicagoland with tiny startup grants. There's a number of programs out there. There's a Kauffman Fellows program if you've got your own venture fund or more experienced. But I will tell you, I think some of it is getting, I chaired the board of the Illinois Venture Capital Association for a couple of years for one reason only, which was to get more private equity and venture firms focused on investing more in women and people of color, because so much is if you're like if you're in the old boys network and you are just reacting to deals you see, it's not that you're not wanting to support a lot more entrepreneurs that are women or of color. You're just not seeing them. So how you develop networks that get you more focused on seeing a broader range is really important. And I learned that lesson very quickly. When me and my partner started looking much more proactively for women entrepreneurs to support, lo and behold, we started finding a lot more women entrepreneurs to support. So I think there's sort of a growing sense there. And I think women need to find groups of other women where they're seeing them do it to get a little bit of the courage of the conviction to see you can actually be a very successful, entrepreneur, and there's many out there. And so I think kind of developing networks that you can tap into that will give you a little bit more courage to take that entrepreneurial plunge is one way to think about it.
So along those lines, I do know that Morgan Stanley has some women who are deeply in the ESG space and looking for the right businesses to support. Kathy, could you speak very specifically to that?
So I think it's the lens around what values that you have and where you want to invest. And traditionally, it might be in the private equity world, but I think there's ways to think about in the public world about where you want to invest, what's important to you, and where you want to deploy some of your investments. I mean, a way you can do that is investing in broad-based funds that have a lens of ESG over it, or can have different lenses about what you want to be focused on. It could be clean energy or animal rights or anything in that different types of areas, but also in the area of debt. Also at Morgan Stanley, we help people think through about if you're going to lend money, you can be lending it into parts of the country that need funding, and where you're lending money that to a community that is trying to start a center for something or something in the public area. So thinking about it that way. And then Susan, I was just going to make a little bit of this risk reward in a simple way to think about it is people traditionally have three goals. One is short term, one's intermediate, one's long term. And there's a balance to come into that. First and foremost, you want to get rid of bad debt as quickly as possible. And that's debt that's really expensive, a high interest rate. A lot of times that is school loans that Cecilia talked about, working through that. Good debt is having a mortgage, for example. But through that, then you need to have a safety net of where you can hold your money for emergencies that really doesn't have a lot of risk. And then, intermediate goals will depend on what you're trying to achieve in the next 5 to 10 years. And then finally, everybody needs to think about allocating money towards that year that you no longer want. You want to be financially independent and you don't want to be working. And sadly, half of working America has no money saved towards retirement. And the average amount of Social Security income in this country is $22,000 a year. So the gap between what you have saved and Social Security is a lot of people need to start thinking about doing that, and you can do it.
So that's actually a wonderful opportunity to segue into that later stage of life where now you have taken care of your wealth and you're in a position to be more philanthropic. And I would love in particular for Cecilia and Jennifer to talk about how they think about advising people in their philanthropic investments.
So I will start. We've taken a couple of stances in terms of trying to support those who want to get started in philanthropy. You'll hear comments. I think Jeff Bezos made this comment last year about how it's hard to give away money. And it is a challenge, but it's something that can be done, particularly if you're willing to seek the support of advisors, philanthropic advisors, intermediaries. We work with funders to help them think broadly about what's possible, to think beyond the closed networks that they're already a part of, and to look for opportunities to support nonprofit leaders, other social change agents who are embedded in their communities, who come from diverse backgrounds, and to help to understand, and this goes back to the conversation around risk, that there are many different kinds of risk. And what I find a lot of times when people are doing their philanthropy, they become even more risk averse. They're afraid of making a mistake. They're afraid that they'll give money to a nonprofit and perhaps the impact won't be what they had hoped. So they end up focusing quite a bit on very specific kinds of risks. Sort of, has the organization handled a big grant before? And is it something that everyone else knows and will respect my choice? And then they'll miss the risks that are associated with funding a project in an organization that may have a very strong financial background and history in one space, but is moving into a community or into a problem area that they're less familiar with. So what we advocate for is defining a set of criteria that are important to you, doing a very open and broad call in order to find some of the best ideas and to invite the good ideas to come in. And then to use those criteria to evaluate those projects and to hold yourself to a sort of discipline to help identify some of the best ideas. We do that. We have a database of projects that have come through that. There are other resources out there where people have done due diligence and done an analysis. So one of the ways to start is actually to make use of some of those existing resources.
I think that's excellent advice. I also get the question in terms of getting involved on how do you get involved? I'll come in a little different way on a nonprofit board, which is a way to get very involved with your time as well as your philanthropic dollars. And so there I always tell people, again, if you've got a certain area that you're very passionate about, that you care deeply about, so you could say it's education, you find an education organization, and I'm with Cecilia, you should be looking at lots of different ones, because to me, the most important thing too is the leadership of that organization. Do you think it's got good leadership? And then the third thing I always say when you get involved, figure out where your talents are and how your skills can be brought to bear to that organization. So when I get involved in a specific nonprofit, I try to come in with my exit strategy in mind, saying, here are the couple objectives that they're trying to accomplish that I think I can help them with. And once I've helped them with it, that's when it's time to bring somebody else in and move on to sort of the next thing on far of that. And then as far as our family, I'm involved with our family foundation as well. And we have done much work with MacArthur in the past. Cecilia, love partnering with MacArthur. And we went in and have a theory of change. So if you haven't heard of that concept, and you can apply it to an individual nonprofit or to your bigger philanthropic effort, to say, what is the change that I am trying to help in the world, and have a theory about how I can make that change happen. And then you can start making investments around it and see, oh, what is the impact? Is that actually helping or is it not helping? And we have picked a single neighborhood in Chicago, the North Lawndale neighborhood, and are trying to comprehensively look at different ways we can help get that neighborhood to be more like any neighborhood that that was be a thriving neighborhood anywhere else in Chicago. So how do we define a thriving neighborhood, and how do we help North Lawndale become a thriving neighborhood from within? So we have a theory of change around how we're trying to do that.
Thank you so much. Great advice. Going back to women, especially anyone new in their career and really looking to rise, how important is a mentor, a coach, someone who is your champion? Who were your mentors, coaches, or champions, and what did you learn?
I'm glad to take that one on. I think there's a lot of discussion about coaches and mentors and people who help. And I think it really comes down to the root of it is beginning with that you always need to realize you need to be your own self-advocate. Melinda Gates, who I was reading one of her blogs, was saying that, it's really important that you set your own agenda. Otherwise, someone else will set it for you. And I've always remembered that. And so over time, and, I've been a working career and a personal career and all just my entire life, I've always thought about advocating for myself. And so sometimes when I've had challenges or where I don't know the answer of what to do next, I surround myself by people who are smarter than me that help me think through. And so I have hired, paid for coaches over time. I would tell you I've probably had a dozen different types of coaches, and they take on different things that I'm thinking about. They'll help me be better at what I'm doing. And they can be formal relationships and not so formal relationships. And I'm thinking about my mini me when I was in my 20s. And I'm doing this right now for a lady who works at Morgan Stanley with me, who had reached out to me because Morgan Stanley had a formal or has a formal mentoring program, but she just wanted some coaching. And at the end of at every meeting, I say to her, please put an agenda together about what we're going to talk about. Please summarize at the end what we talked about, and please set another date for us to meet again. And again, that comes down to self-advocating, but I've mentored so many people where we start out with one meeting and then I never hear from them again. So that would be my one piece of advice.
That's excellent advice. Cecilia?
Yeah, I was smiling a little bit because we used to talk about students that after graduation, it was like someone had taken a book that you'd gotten halfway through and they took it away from you so you could never figure out how it turned out. And I think that's one of the more frustrating aspects of being on the mentor side of this. I was frequently in a situation where there wasn't anyone obvious for me to seek out as a mentor who was ahead of me. But what I learned to do was to get advice from multiple sources and filter that advice and figure out, okay, what about that advice applies to me and what might be different. So that's one thing I'll note is that you shouldn't expect that you're going to have a mentor and the mentor is going to be your sole source of information and guidance going forward. The other, we talked a bit about having a champion, and I was late before I realized what a champion was, but I have to tell you, I have benefited from champions. And a champion is someone who you may not even have a one-on-one relationship with, but who is in a position where they've watched you, they've seen what accomplishments you've had. So one lesson is to make sure that every once in a while, you're going to have to toot your own horn, so to speak. My mother had a saying that it was a poor dog that didn't wag its own tail. And so every once in a while, you need to do that so people know what you've done and you've accomplished. And that champion is someone who is in the room where it happens, to borrow what I said earlier, and therefore can, in some opportunities, speak up or call attention to your strengths and talents and help advance and help opportunities be created for you. So I think being conscious that there are champions there that it can be really critical to advancement of your careers is another piece of that.
Yeah.
That's great advice. Jennifer?
Yeah, I think you guys were just, you nailed it. So the only thing I guess I would add is that I agree. You never know where you're going to find mentors, and sponsors or champions are harder to come by. I would just say, pay attention to everybody that you work with very closely and see who you think is smart in what areas. And when you need help in that areas, it's that sort of go for them for advice, because mentors don't even have to be levels above you. They can be your equal. They can be even below you, depending where you are, but they are really good at something. So I just say be a very active listener and remember and just pay attention to who's good at what. And when you go and seek advice, people are usually willing to give it. And then, yes, I encourage you follow up, because that isn't where people fall down all the time. If you follow up with people, then you get a real meaningful relationship, and then it can become something more than just a mentoring relationship as well. But that's going to be up to you to make that happen.
Jennifer,
can I
you
add
said-
one little piece to all of this, because you just said something that reminded me of this. In my very first job, I very early learned that the administrative staff was not, my colleagues weren't necessarily treating them with the respect that they deserved. And I learned from that, from getting to know the administrative staff, that there was just real value in respecting the expertise everywhere it is and learning from them how things work, because typically they've been at the organization longer than any place else. And that's something I've carried with me everywhere that I go. And it's a piece of career advice sometimes young people, I think, miss out on, is that that you want that advice, that mentorship, those pieces of information can come from anywhere, and you should exercise respect and care with everyone you engage with.
I love that. And I also think of that as, giving a hand up and a hand down. So we're always looking to listen to and help those below us, as well as, oh, please help me rise in my career. Jennifer touched on something earlier that I loved, and it was her comment about not being the kind of investor who was looking to, I'm going to beat you, but I'm looking to make investments wisely that benefit all. And I think that that's actually kind of a definition of social impact investing, which is growing. And I think that that's what women are more naturally inclined to do. So could you speak a little bit more about that, Jennifer? And then would anyone else care to comment?
Yeah, I'll tell you I went through this George Floyd moment, I think, was hard for all of us in many different ways. And for me, it was like, what am I going to do coming out of that moment? And I was lucky because I'd been a successful investor at this point. So again, it ties into risk too. I could take a risk in a different way. And I went to my family, I said, we need to be supporting, if we're going to try and reduce the wealth gap, I want to not just support individual Black entrepreneurs, but we need to have more Black asset managers. And I know lower middle market, that's my investing. So I want to go find a lower middle market firm that's completely Black owned and run. We could not find one. And so we created one. And I spent 5 months with my partner. We interviewed about 150 potential Black GPs, and we created a new firm here in Chicago called Fifth Century Partners, named because the first 4 centuries weren't so good. Maybe the fifth will be better. And now getting to see this blossom and grow. It's 2 men and a woman partner. Woman came out of Andreessen Horowitz. One of the gentlemen came out of Vistria Capital here in Chicago, and the other was running his own company in Boston. And they now all live here. And getting to help create something like that. And they only invest in either Black-owned companies or majority-owned companies that they're going to convert to Black-owned or bring Black leadership to. And to me, that's how we're going to really sort of have an impact. And so it was the same kind of investing I've always done, but with a very, very different lens on it. And I will tell you, my whole family, it's the thing we probably feel collectively most proud about. But then coming out of that, just the number of investment opportunities and things that are coming our way to really support the Black community here in particular has just been incredibly meaningful to me. And so the goal really is saying, how many Black entrepreneurs can we support and help really be successful and empower them, and just got me thinking, about investing very differently. And it's been fun getting the family all involved in this effort.
It's great. Kathy or Cecilia? No. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Cecilia.
Well, I think what we just talked about is perfect in terms of thinking a bit about a point raised earlier about short-term, intermediate, and long-term. And that is that part of the essence to me of social investment, of impact investment, is actually taking a more long-term perspective than I think frequently is taken when we're making decisions about where to invest. There's more of a short-term and an intermediate kind of return. But I think over the long term, making an investment that addresses wealth inequality, that increases the economic vitality of communities, is good business, particularly for businesses that are going to be deriving their livelihood from those communities, from demand for services and products. So it's something that we've seen in the context of climate. This idea of, well, if you think are longer term, you need a healthy planet if you're going to survive. That there's a whole range of things that if we are open to a longer term perspective, you can see the value in that kind of activity.
Kathy, anything to add?
No, one of the topics, though, I think that we had talked about as a group before was just about like women on the rise and how do you balance work life and everything that's going on in your life. And I think sometimes I talk to people about philanthropy and what they can do to give back, and they're like, well, boy, I just don't even have enough time between my work and my family. And what piece of advice that I've always thought about is it is having that long-term view that Cecilia, you had mentioned, that it's all about work life and integrating everything. And if you think about, these intersecting circles about having your work and your career and your health and your family and then your community. I think you can stage this all out over time. And I look at myself in particular in my 20s, I really invested in my career and I had my blinders on and I didn't spend a lot of time on anything else. And then in my 30s, I really got focused on my family and raising my two sons and my husband, and then evolved into my friendship. And at the side, I had put, probably my health on the side. And as soon as I got my kids launched, I took up my game of golf and my health. And now I can really see the next chapter of my life being pretty active in boards and giving back. And so I always want people to just think you can maybe try to do it all, but you got to get that long-term plan together and say, you know what, maybe I really do want to do things for the community, but maybe that'll be something I approach somewhere different and whatever. And I've had a lot of people who launch great careers in their 50s after having focused on other things in their 20s and 30s.
And that is so hopeful. I believe that you are all mothers of sons and that none of you have a daughter. And I find that a little bit intriguing since you represent, women really are rising. As you point out, Kathy, we control more wealth, and there are a lot of stats that show women are rising. How do you talk to your sons about that? And what are your thoughts?
So when my son was young and I was still a faculty member, I was at Barnard College at the time, and we had a Center for Research on Women that used to have events and talks, and frequently, because I was kind of juggling work-life balance, and my mother-in-law was my primary caregiver, but she was only available in the daytime, my son would end up going to things and with me. And I remember at one point he exclaimed, gee, women, girls. What about boys? How come we never talk about boys? So there was this moment of recognition of how much I was indoctrinating him in terms of these activities. But he has gone to a feminist economics conference with me. So I think I set him up well. And I observe what I feel is a much healthier dynamic that's happening now that he's married and he has one young child and a second on the way, that I think helped. Going back earlier, we were talking about how there's cycles over time and in this work-life balance. And one of those cycles for me was just in how much my career and my work time was taking up our family time and how much my partner's work time and health time. And during my son's high school years, his dad was spent most of the time with him. His dad worked from the house. His dad had less time-intensive kind of responsibilities in the workplace. And I just think that was a wonderful opportunity to demonstrate for him that you're making trade-offs, you're trying to achieve balance across the board in the whole family kind of dynamic. So I'm really hopeful. I think having a son, I think I've raised a feminist son. I'm not sure if he'd agree with me, but we can ask him.
Well, that's a loaded question because I don't have any girls, but I certainly have nieces and other children, and they've grown up and I've watched. And I think I've always just tried to be a really good role model, both for women and men. And I'm really sensitive to like having biases about, what this is what boys, girls, or this is what girls do. And try to have people be, color blind, like that they just don't have biases and that we're all, hopefully hardworking people doing the right thing for other people. And I always encourage boys and girls and women and men just to kind of understand where people are coming from and have a really good understanding about why people behave in different ways and what their life has been like. And I think if people always take a step back and have an understanding about other people, they'll see where they're coming from and, just make the world a better place.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Oh, not the dad. I have an only son, and so he was more angry that he never had a sibling, but he grew up. My husband had his own company too, and so I think all he's ever known is having entrepreneurs as parents, and so I'd like to think. That's what he'll end up marrying someday as an entrepreneur. I think he's just very much in the mode that everybody is working and being productive and hopefully giving back as they've got time, and time will tell as they're launching here. But we've got lots of women in the family, so he's definitely surrounded by the women voices.
So we just got a great question. Does joining a philanthropic board require both the financial and time investment? All of you have served on many boards.
I would say, yeah, typically they do. And depending on the board, they'll be very explicit about what the expectation is, both time and financial. Those are the more well-established ones. There's also startup organizations. My husband's been just recently, and I've been involved with the startup nonprofit too. And those often tend to be more time, and they're more volunteer boards, and can be less money from you as you're helping them get going. So it sort of depends on, a lot of times, the life cycle of the organization, I would say. But typically they really are expecting both.
And I would add that there's a range, as you noted. There are some larger foundations where you may not be expected to invest funds, and then there, in addition to time and financial, I'll note for an organization like Lever for Change, we're a relatively new nonprofit. There's also the network aspect, that sometimes you're choosing board members because you want the board members to help you connect with networks that you're not part of. So I think it's time, finance, and networks that are sometimes expected.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I would say if that question's coming from anybody of any age, there are junior boards, and those boards of different charities are looking for people who give time. And there's a lot boots on the ground of help that charities need, so you can seek that out. But then Cecilia had said about this network. If you're working, a lot of companies are looking for places to donate money to, and they will often do it on behalf of their employees. And so if you maybe don't have the funds to be giving, a lot of companies will direct money in that fashion. And I've also, I'm a financial advisor, so I see a lot of people who would like to be philanthropic, and believe it or not, really don't know how to do that. And so there's an education role that people can play in helping people too. And
the card there has some great tools to help.
Yes, well, Lever for Change is a tool to help in that regard. And I'll just note, because this is a mistake that I made. I early on ended up on boards without really getting clarity on the front end about what was the expectation. So I urge you, if it's not clear, if it's not spelled out, and with less mature boards, it may not be, do ask.
Good point.
Every sentence has been a pearl of wisdom for our audience, and I so appreciate you for spending the time and sharing your insights. We are almost out of time, and I promised that I would ask one more question, and that is there anything else you want to tell us?
No, just go after it. If you're not a little scared, you're not doing it right. Push yourself.
Everyone should do one thing that scares them each day, right? In order to make sure they continue to grow.
Well, maybe once a week. I don't know if every day is. That might be asking a lot.
Kathy, anything else?
I think my key word would be, it's really important that you're self-motivated in all aspects of life, and being responsible, that you're doing the best thing for yourself, and sitting down and having a conversation with yourself about what you want to do in the next month or 6 months or a year or many years is really, really key. The key to success.
Know yourself and go seek help. That's what I've heard. Go find the right person in your network or outside of your network. All right. Well,
And
thank
I'll
you.
just-
Oh, go ahead, Cecilia.
I was just going to say, and on the back of the behind me, there's this picture that I look at every day, and there's a line in it. It said, "And she wanted to be free. She had no choice but to dig in deep for a chance to make it happen." So dig in deep.
Great.
Excellent words on which to end this conversation. Thank you again so very much. As I mentioned before, the video will be made available. We will send it out to everybody who registered shortly within the next day, and then articles will follow that summarize all this great advice too. And they will be featured in our Better Letters. And if you haven't subscribed to our Better Letter, you should. It's chock full of wisdom and inspiration. Thanks for everything. And I hope to see you all again soon.